Hello, and welcome to Growing Older with Gusto, a podcast dedicated to people who are growing older in a positive and productive way. And today, our guest is Philip Slayton, who's coming to us. Philip is a law professor, a law firm partner, author, and past president of Penn Canada. He has written a book, which is a collection of essays that he calls Essays from the Edge of 80, quote, all remaining passengers. So for those of you who aspire to be part of Club O, I recommend you read this book. It's really interesting and fun. So welcome to the show, Philip.
Thank you, Gail. It's a pleasure to be here.
So let's start out with talking about this book, All Remaining Passengers, your essay collection. First of all, how does it feel for you to be a member of Club O?
Well, I have mixed feelings about it, Gail. First of all, as Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones said once at a concert, I'm happy to be here. I'd be happy to be anywhere. So I'm good I'm here, first of all. Secondly, as everybody who is an octogenarian knows, it has its issues, it has its problems, but on the whole, there's a lot of positive things about it, and I'm fine.
So one of the essays that I read that it speaks about being realistic about growing older and trying to balance reality with optimism. How do you balance those two?
Well, I do think that as you grow old, you should not ignore or pretend the problems that I've just mentioned don't exist. I mean, there are big problems connected with getting old. I mean, one of them, for example, obviously, is health. Older people tend to have more health issues that they have to deal with. Another big problem, I think, of being old, or in my case, I'm 81 now, is that people you care for, friends, family, have an unfortunate habit of dying on you. And so your world hollows out and you lose people that mean a lot to you. That's another hard thing to grapple with. But you can't ignore these things. You can't pretend they're not happening. You have to face up with them. You have to think about them. You have to deal with them as best you can. And you have to carry on with the positive aspects of life that make life worth living. So there is a balance to be struck, as you suggest, for sure. But I think when you strike that balance, you must remember that it is a balance. So there is both bad and good, and you have to deal with both. Deal with the bad and exploit the good.
I am not a member of Club O yet, and I hope to be, but I've already lost people along the way that I feel left the planet way too early. How does that differ, from maybe being at an age where you feel like this is just destiny and your biology is your destiny and here we are?
Well, I mean, when you get to be my age, you know for sure that you're running out of runway, right? You know that there's much more past to your life than there is future.
Right.
Some people find that depressing. Some people find it frightening. I don't fit into either of those camps.
How do you find it?
I reckon I don't fit into either of those camps.
Which camp are you in?
I mean, not in either of those camps. I'm in the camp of, well, here it is. Face the facts, face up to reality, and do the best you can, and be as creative as you can, be as social as you can, be as active as you can in the circumstances that you find yourself in. So what I'm trying to say, Gail, is you don't pretend that there are not bad things associated with being old, because for sure there are. But don't let those things obsess you unnecessarily, and focus on the things that are good. There will always be good things. For example, one thing in particular, it may be that friends and family, people that you cared for a great deal, have died, and that's a source of sadness and grief and regret. But they haven't all died. There's many still left, and those people are a source of joy and happiness and fun.
That's a really great way to put it. I really like that. It's a great way of looking at life when you're getting, I like to say older, not old, but older. We're all getting older, whatever age we are.
Well, everybody on the planet, Gail, is getting older every day.
Correct. We're always a day older than we were yesterday.
That is correct.
So what would you say to our listeners who really want to be as vital as you are in their 80s? What would you tell them to do?
Well, I think when I think of my own life, and by the way, I think it's important to think of your life. But Joan Didion, the famous American writer, said we all tell ourselves stories in order to be able to live. We all tell ourselves stories about our lives. We kind of think about our lives. We construct a narrative, almost as if we are a character in a novel. And I think you need to do that to make sense of your existence. So that said, when I think about my life, I think one of the driving forces has been curiosity. I'm a curious person. I like to know things. I've developed new interests quite recently in my old age. For example, I used to ignore the bird kingdom. And then one day I sort of looked around. I thought, my God, these birds, this is fantastic. The bird world is fantastic. There's 11,000 species of birds in the world. Some of them are incredibly beautiful. They all do very interesting and complicated things. And so I got interested quite recently, in the last year or so, in birds. I became a birder.
Oh my gosh. Wow. So what's your favorite bird group?
Well, I went, for example, earlier this year to Costa Rica, which has about 1,000 or 1,100 different species of birds. And I went there as a bird watcher, as a birder, trying to add to my life list. So that's a new interest of mine. I have others as well. About 20 years ago, when I was in my early 60s, my wife said to me, you should learn to play the piano. She said, I'm giving you some piano lessons for your birthday. That was 20 years ago. I started taking piano lessons, and I still do. I'm not a very good piano player, but I'm certainly better than I was 20 years ago. So that was another relatively new interest. I think you need to recognize, even though you're old, you can take on new interests, you can learn new things, you can do new things, you can be curious about the world and about life, and that will make your life, even when you're old, interesting and fulfilling.
I totally agree. And I always say at the end of each podcast, stay curious and stay connected, because those are the two pillars that have come to me throughout my doing this podcast of people who are successful at growing older with gusto. That's what they do. They do what you're doing precisely. So
I certainly agree with the second thing that you mentioned, in addition to curiosity, staying connected. I mean, the lonely person is a depressed person. Now, some people cannot help being lonely because of particular circumstances they encounter. But it's best to have friends. If you're happy enough, you're lucky enough to have a family, as I am, and I have grandchildren, that's wonderful. You need to keep in touch with these people. You need to be part of their lives. You need to have a wide social circle. You need to go out and have lunch with your friends as often as possible. As you say, quite correctly, Gail, you must stay connected.
Absolutely. And what is, aside from your new birding hobby, what have given you the greatest pleasures as you've navigated through your life so far?
Well, I've changed careers twice in my life. I began my career as a legal academic. You mentioned I was a law professor. I did that for quite some time. And after a while, I said, I don't want to do this anymore. And I became a practicing lawyer in Toronto, on Toronto's Bay Street, which is the Canadian equivalent of Wall Street. And I did that for 20 years. And then when I was 55, much to the astonishment of my partners, my law firm, I left law. I resigned. I left the law firm. I haven't given it a second thought since then. And I began writing books. I mean, the book that you look at, we see my All Remaining Passages, is my 9th.
Wow.
As I like to say, some of my books are better than some of the other ones, some of my other ones. But I developed this third career as a writer. And that, by the way, was fed in considerable measure by the curiosity that I measured. I was curious about things. So I started looking at them. I mean, I wrote a book about anti-Semitism. I was curious about it. I learned about it. And that curiosity and that learning drove that book. I've written a book about tennis, which is about as far from anti-Semitism as you can get, because I was interested and curious about it. So that's sort of what's kept me going. And I'm just beginning a new book now, which I hope I'll finish before, as you put it, I leave the planet. And that's what, it gives me a reason to get up in the morning, something I want to do, something I enjoy.
Have a purpose. That's great. That's very important. So this All Remaining, I just love the title. I love the title. One of your chapters, or I think actually, I wanted to actually, before we switch over to Substack, which I'm so impressed that you were on there before I was, that's for sure. Any favorite philosophies that you have about life?
No, I don't have any particular philosophy about life, other than the things I've been talking to you about, which is, I think it's beautifully summed up by the way you close your podcast: stay curious, stay connected. That's maybe not a philosophy. That's a grand word, philosophy, but it's certainly good advice. And then I would encourage people to follow it.
And what, in your opinion, have been the greatest changes in society throughout your lifetime?
Oh my God, that's a big question. I was born in 1944. When I was born, the World War II hadn't finished yet. The changes in society in general, Western societies or all societies, have been enormous. And so we all know what some of them have been. If I had to pick the single biggest change, it would be the advent of digital technology and the internet and all of that stuff, which has changed everything, and it continues to change it. A whole host of other changes. It's been an enormous, I sometimes say that I was born in the golden age. I was born in 1944. In England, my family came to Canada when I was 10 years old. And we lived in Canada during a very peaceful, prosperous time. And there were all kinds of opportunities for everybody. And we benefited. I and my family benefited enormously from it. That unfortunately has changed now. I don't think even in a country like Canada, which is a blessed country compared to most, you could say that we live in golden times. There's too much social uncertainty. There's too much economic uncertainty. We are necessarily caught up in world events, whether we like it or not. We are necessarily affected by the governments and administrations of other countries. I won't mention anyone in particular, whether we like it or not. There's a sense of insecurity, a sense of unpredictability that's changed things. So that's been a big change as well in my life. And that I think is common to pretty much all societies.
Right. You're right. You're absolutely right. So getting over to Substack, and you'll have to tell me a little bit more about how you ended up getting on Substack, but that's interesting. And you write about why old people dance. Can you tell us why dancing is so important to people as they grow older?
Well, let me just back up a little bit and talk to you about the Substack, which is called my Substack, which is called The End Game.
Okay.
And I started that in 22, I think it was November or December, but I had a friend who had a Substack, still does. I was having lunch with her. I was talking to her about her Substack. And she said, it's easy. You should do one. I thought, okay, I'll do one. Just like that. I started doing it weekly. It still is weekly, although occasionally I miss a week. So the last Substack that I did was, I think, 117 or 118. I've done a lot of them.
Wow.
And necessarily, having done that many and continuing to do them, necessarily, I had to range fairly far afield. I mean, the common theme is always something hopefully of interest to older people that is upon their life, but I've had to range quite far afield. So on the dancing thing, you asked specifically about dancing, it was a recent one. My eye was caught by an article in the New York Times, I don't know, it's probably about a month or 6 weeks ago now, about a program, I think in Brussels, for old people to go to nightclubs. Some of these people are really old.
Like how old? Like 100?
Well, they're 90s. And they all get dressed up and they all get in a bus. Go to this nightclub, and they kind of dance the night away as best they can. And and there were some photographs in this accompanying this article. It was extraordinary. And some of these old people, by the way, didn't behave terribly well. I mean, one of the bartenders of this nightclub commented, some of them get so drunk they pass out and have to go back to the old folks' home.
Do they get to call the medical alert to get them off the floor, or what happened?
This piqued my interest. And then I started looking around and I discovered other such places. One in the United States, I think it was in Chicago or something like that.
What? Really?
So this is interesting. And of course, there are some medical conditions like Parkinson's, for example, movement disorder conditions that old people sometimes have that apparently benefit from dancing. But the idea that, you're old, you can barely totter down the street, you need a walker or a cane or something, that's inevitable if you're old. Not so. You could be going out to a nightclub and dancing. But, this deserved a little bit of publicity, so hence that particular thing.
It was very cute. I really enjoyed reading that. That was great.
My last Substack, I don't know if you've seen it, Gail, is about Keith Richards, famous man of the Rolling Stones, and Ringo Starr, also famous of the Beatles. Why them? Because Keith Richards is 81 now, Ringo Starr is 85, and they're both still touring as musicians and having a wonderful time.
Yeah, and Paul McCartney is coming back to Chicago this fall. Yes.
Yeah, he's well into his 80s. I think, I'm not sure how old he is, but he's well into his 80s.
He's amazing. He's amazing.
So these are people who like what they do, and they're gonna keep doing it.
That's wonderful. So I want to ask you though about that one submission you have about why old people dance. So what is Zumba Gold? What is that?
I think it's. I didn't go back to look up exactly what it is, but I think it's a kind of dance.
I used to do Zumba, so I'm assuming it's a form of dance for older people.
Yeah, well, you obviously, Gail, know more about this than I do. So I should be asking you.
I don't know. I just thought it was cute. Anyway, so you mentioned earlier, and I wanted to talk with you a little bit about your book on anti-Semitism. It's called Ancient Hatred in the Age of Identity Politics. And it's so relevant now. And what inspired you to write it? I know you were curious about the topic, but what was the...
What inspired me to write about it was a call from a publisher who said, hey, we want to do a book on anti-Semitism. We think, quote unquote, you're the guy. So I said, yeah, I don't think I'm the guy. I really don't think I am. I never thought about writing a book, but I thought about it after that phone call, and I decided, well, you know what? This is a really interesting subject. It's something I know a little bit about. I'm Jewish myself. Something I know a little bit about, but not a lot. This would be a good opportunity, getting back to the curiosity thing, this would be a good opportunity to really get at this subject and think about it, write about it, and try and understand it. So I rang the publisher back and said, okay, I'm the guy, I'll do it. And that's what I did. And I'm very glad I did. I learned a huge amount. I'm proud of that book. I think of the 9 books I mentioned to you before, some of which, as I said, are better than the others. That's particularly good. Although, in a way, the timing, it came out in June of 22 or 3. It came out before October 7th. Yeah. And of course, October 7th changed everything. I mean, if I wrote that book today, it would be a different book.
Interesting.
So that was, I don't even know how to describe that, but that was a feature.
I am familiar with anti-Semitism, encountered a lot of it growing up. Any personal discoveries that you made as you were going through the writing process of that book?
Personal discoveries. Well, it's interesting. Although I'm Jewish, my family was non-observant. I always had the sense, I was Jewish and so on, but we didn't belong to a synagogue, for example. We didn't really celebrate the major Jewish holidays, although my father sometimes pretended to, but he wasn't committed or genuine. So I never felt, other than some vague way, particularly Jewish. But as I wrote that book, I came to feel much more strongly my Jewish identity. It did that for me at a personal level. And then as I wrote it as well, my views of all kinds of things, of the history of the Jewish people, of the relations between Judaism and Islam, between Judaism and Christianity, the circumstances in the Middle East, and all of that developed what anti-Semitism really was and how to think about it. All those things developed as I wrote this book. And certainly, I don't know if any of my readers benefited from the book, but I certainly benefited from writing it in terms of understanding and knowledge.
And I heard that people, as they get older, if they weren't particularly religious, they tend to become a little bit more religious. Have you encountered that?
No, I wouldn't describe myself as religious.
Not necessarily observant, but just feeling that they need more of something spiritual, maybe.
No, Gail, I don't think I'm particularly talking about that. I think I'm talking about more, where exactly do I belong? What is the history of my family and of the people that my family belong to? That's important. And particularly in the world today, or at least until fairly recently, people tended to be somewhat rootless. They didn't think too much about stuff like that, the history of themselves, of their families, and of the tribes that their families belong to. Now things are changing, I think, with the new kind of political movements in the United States. For example, your vice president, J.D. Vance, talks a lot about about his family and about his people, from Appalachia, about the fact that his family is buried in a graveyard in Kentucky, and you can go there and see these graves, and that gives him a sense of belonging to the United States and the people of the United States that other people don't have. And those other people who are in the United States but do not have that feeling, maybe their presence in the United States is suspect, and so on. It's a whole long discussion you can have there. But I think people do feel the need to think about where they're from. And I think, getting back to this book on anti-Semitism, one of the payoffs for me was the exploring and thinking about that in my case.
Any takeaways that you would like people who are going to read this book to have after they've read the book?
Which book, the anti-Semitism book?
Anti-Semitism.
Well, there's a lot in it. I think it's not a particularly long book. And I think, I may say so myself, I think it reads well. It's not a great academic tome with zillions of footnotes, although there are a lot of footnotes. I think inevitably, perhaps the thing that comes out of the book most of all is the creation of the State of Israel and the implications of that for Jewish people, the implications for Jewish people in the world, all around the world, not just those in Israel, of the kind of state it is, and its history in the Middle East, and of course now the circumstances of the Middle East, which are, in my opinion, catastrophic for everybody, including Israel, including the Jews, including Jews in the diaspora. Even though I'm perhaps reading the book in hindsight now, but that comes out powerfully, I think. And I'm particularly interested in questions such as whether or not it's anti-Semitic to call someone a Zionist. I don't believe it is. Many people do, and increasingly that's become the case since October 7th. I'm interested in questions like that. And I do think the approach that people have to these questions is awfully muddled. They need to try and think them through carefully and logically. But that so seldom happens. Often the discussion is very quickly overtaken by emotion. People cease to think clearly about these issues. And often, by the way, people are not ignorant of the history as well. It's very important to understand the history. Just a minute.
Right. So if our listeners would like to find your books, in particular your anti-Semitism book and the one we talked about, The All Remaining Passengers, where can they go?
Well, the simplest way to do it, I reluctant to admit this, but the simplest way to do it is to get it on Amazon.
Of course.
Kind of inevitable, right, Gail? It's kind of inevitable. Just another few cents in the pocket of Jeff Bezos. I'm sorry, I can't help it, but that's the easiest way to do it.
Okay, I agree with you totally. So it's been a pleasure talking with you, Philip, and I hope to have you back to talk about the next book and stay in touch. And to all our listeners, thanks for listening. Please share this podcast with your friends and family if you've enjoyed it, and how can you not enjoy it? And stay curious and stay connected.
Well, thank you, Gail. It's been a pleasure. Bye.